Hey, what's up everyone? Zach D Productions here, and I'm here with a list video for you guys. Now, for this list, I'll be going over bands that I believe have only released a few good albums. Now, I have done videos before on bands that I only like one song from, and bands that I like only a few songs from, a handful of songs from. So, for this video, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to go over bands that I think have only released a few good albums. Now, if your opinion is different, that's totally okay. If you believe that all the bands that I'm gonna mention here have had flawless discographies, everything from the first album up to the last album, that's totally okay. You're entitled to your own opinion, of course. This is just my opinion. It's all subjective at the end of the day. So I have a list of 4 bands here. So not a very long list, just 4 bands. And this list is also in no particular order. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first band I think I'm going to go over here is Queensryche. Now, I could definitely see a lot of people, especially the hardcore fans of Queensryche, disagreeing with this one for sure. But I think a lot of people can at least agree that up to a certain point, they pretty much stopped making good music. For me, I think it was after Here in the Now Frontier. That's where they kind of dropped off, you could say. After that album, they started to release material that was just uninspired, bland, and just music that just was not interesting. Now, I know a lot of people make the argument that when Geoff Tate left the band and Todd La Torre came to the band, that's where the band really stepped things up. And I think objectively, the Todd La Torre albums with Queensryche, they're objectively quality material, but for me, I just don't care. I just don't care about those albums. Number one, I'd rather stick to the 80s and early 90s material of Queensryche because that is a lot better. And number two, I'm also not a fan of Todd La Torre personally. I don't think he's a good guy. Like, I'm just not a fan of him personally. So there you have it. I think their last really good album was Promised Land. But I would honestly say the last okay or decent album of theirs was Here in the Now Frontier, because that album does have some stuff that I do like. It does have some songs that I do dig quite a bit, but Promised Land, I think, was honestly their last really good album. And of course, you can't go wrong with any of those 80s albums. I mean, they've never released a bad album in the 80s. Operation Mindcrime is probably one of the best concept metal albums of all time. Just really solid stuff for sure. And I would say it's their best album as well. And I think a lot of fans would agree with me on that. So, yeah, Queensryche, I liked everything from their first album pretty much up to Promised Land, and that's pretty much been it. So there you go, Queensryche. I figured they deserve a place on the list. Okay, so the next band up. Now, I can definitely see some people giving me looks for this one. But this is one of those bands that I do believe have only released a few good albums, and that band is Coldplay. Now, Coldplay is one of those bands that definitely gets a lot of hate. A lot of hate for Coldplay. I can understand it, but at the same time, I don't. And I say this maybe because it's the nostalgia. I mean, without the nostalgia, would I still say that, they have good material? I'm not sure, but I do remember being very obsessed with Coldplay back in high school, of course. And, this is one of those bands that I can listen to time for the nostalgia. I think that some of their stuff is actually quite good. Now, I know that a lot of people say that after Viva La Vida or Death and All of His Friends, that's where the band has really dropped off. I can definitely understand that for sure, but I think Ghost Stories was actually a pretty good album. I mean, I think after that album, that's where they really dropped off. And I think Ghost Stories was honestly their last good album. I mean, Ghost Stories, it's dark, it's just very interesting sounding and very intriguing sounding. I mean, obviously the title Ghost Story speaks for itself. It has a lot of songs that are just very haunting. I mean, just listen to songs like Midnight and Another's Arms, which are some of the highlights for me off that album. Midnight is honestly one of my favorite Coldplay tracks, to be honest. I just dig the atmosphere and the haunting nature of that song, just really good. And just how eerie it sounds overall. So there is some good stuff on Ghost Stories, I'm not going to lie. So Ghost Stories, I thought, was their last good album. Now, as far as their best material, I would say it's honestly a tie between X and Y and Viva La Vida. Those two albums for me, I think, are their best. I think a lot of fans could agree on that. So there you have it. Coldplay, alternative band, basically. I mean, they're basically alternative rock. I mean, they kind of switched genres a little bit in their later career. Like, they did more mainstream pop stuff, which, I mean, I think some of that stuff they do pretty well, like A Sky Full of Stars. That song I thought was pretty good. And that's a more mainstream pop sounding song that I don't mind. But overall, I do prefer their alternative stuff. Their more alternative rock stuff. So Coldplay, I don't think they're as bad as a lot of people make them out to be, but I can definitely understand the disliking towards them at the same time. So yeah, they do make a lot of boring material, especially their more recent work. So Coldplay, definitely a band that I would put on this list as one of those bands that I think have only released a handful of good albums. Okay, so the next band is Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I think that Emerson, Lake and Palmer has only had 4 good albums, and those, of course, being their first 4 albums. Especially the albums Brain Salad Surgery and the debut album. Those are really strong albums. Really good stuff for sure. And if you like prog rock, these are albums that are definitely worth checking out for sure. I mean, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, definitely a good band. I don't listen to them a whole lot, and maybe this is one of the reasons for it, because they're really only good for a handful of albums. But their debut is a classic. It does have the classic song Lucky Man on it, which is just an iconic classic rock song for sure. Just really good stuff. And Brain Salad Surgery, I would honestly say, is their best album. I mean, it's one of their proggiest albums. And I think after that, like their 90s work, I just can't get into. I've tried getting into their 90s work, but that stuff is just kind of lame, to be honest. I mean, I don't know what it is about their 90s work, but it just doesn't do a whole lot for me, and I think a lot of fans of Emerson, Lake and Palmer can understand where I'm coming from, that their older work is just a lot better. You know, when they did more proggy stuff, more psychedelic type stuff, you know, it's just, that stuff was better, you know? So I think Emerson, Lake and Palmer, they were only good for a few albums, and those, of course, being the first 4 albums from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I genuinely think that the only good albums they had were those first 4 albums. After that, they kind of dropped off, so there you have it. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, had to throw them on the list. Okay, so the last band I'm going to mention here is Garbage. Now, Garbage, it's hard to say, because there are songs on their later stuff that I do like, but those albums as a whole, I just can't get into, you know? I think that as far as full albums go, I think their first few albums are really where it's at. You know, those are the only albums that, you know, I think are really enjoyable to listen to from start to finish. Now, again, there are songs that I do like from their later albums, and you could really say that for some of these other bands as well, you know, but I really can't think of any of these other bands that I've mentioned where I do like at least some of the songs from the albums that I don't like from them. But maybe there's an exception here and there, but who knows. But with Garbage, there are definitely songs that that I can dig from some of their later stuff. But all in all, when it comes to full albums, those first 3 to 4 albums I think are really their only good ones. And I do like Garbage. I think they're a pretty solid band, a pretty solid alternative band or alternative rock band, whatever you want to call them, of course. I do like their music for sure, but those first few albums I think are really where it's at, especially the debut and version 2.0. Very solid albums, and I think everyone can be in agreement that those are the best albums from Garbage. So there you have it. Now, Beautiful Garbage does have songs that I do like Parade. That's a really good song, very catchy. Bleed Like Me does have some good stuff as well, but I don't really return to that album as much. But again, the debut, self-titled debut, and version 2.0, those are the albums that I think are their strongest material. You know, I like pretty much everything from those albums. So, Garbage, I figure they deserve a place on this list as well. So, there you have it. That is a list of some bands that I believe have only had a few good albums. So let me know in the comments, what are some bands that you believe have only released a few good albums? And what did you think of these choices? Feel free to let me know. So, on that note, thanks for watching. Take care.